welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy, hosting a business communication expert so that the tips and strategies that we hear will help us boost our business. It's a wonderful pleasure today to host Dianna Booher from Colleton, Texas, in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex area. I've known her for a couple of decades, meeting through the National Speakers Association. Like many thousands of people, I have respected her work and benefited from her work. She earned a master's degree in English. She's also earned the highest honors and certifications, designations from the National Speakers Association. Dianna helps organizations communicate clearly and works with leaders to increase influence by a strong executive presence, and sometimes with a published book. And speaking of books, Dianna is a prolific author of 49 books, published in 62 foreign languages, and all of them by major publishers. I've often quipped to Dianna that she has written more books than some of us has read. Clients for her training programs, speeches, and coaching include more than 1/3 of the Fortune 500 companies and many governmental agencies and nonprofits. Her specialties: she's an expert on leadership communication, executive presence, sales presentations, business writing, and book writing and publishing. She's also a very prominent and popular and very successful keynote speaker. Welcome, Dianna Booher.
Thank you, Bill. It's great to be with you.
Terrific to have you, a repeat guest on the Biz Communication Show. I've had the privilege of hosting you before and delighted to do it again. Dianna, a beginning thought to me would be, we've got so many things done with technology now. We've got so much texting going on. We've got videos that don't have print on them. And so some people might want to know from an expert author and publisher like you, why are books remaining? What's the appeal of having a book when we have all these, we could call them newfangled ways of communicating? Why do we have books, and why will they persist? Why will we continue to have them?
Well, I think they just have a permanence that other forms of technology do not have. They first of all, give in our culture, the authority that most people want. In fact, we even have the cliche when you ask somebody, do they know what they're talking about? We say, oh yeah, he wrote the book on that subject. And that cliche has been with us because it does convey really an expansive amount of authority and credibility. And
it's more than a cliche, isn't it?
Yes, it is. They have staying power. I mean, you don't carry around a text and say, this person knows what they're talking about. Read this text. And video goes by so fast. You don't have time to ruminate, to meditate on a thought. With the book, you can underline it. And I know, if it's an audio, you can highlight it and capture it and print it out later. But we like to go back and go through something over and over and over. And you have the privilege to really focus on something, and you can involve more senses with that book. You can hear it, you can take that and spin it off into all kinds of formats that you want to use. But I look at that as sort of like the content database for everything else you can do with it.
There is a permanence, and for many of us, there's almost a viral connection when we pick up a book. We get a new book, we like even the smell of it. We like the feel of it. Yes. There's sort of an affection we have with a book that we don't have with a text. And by the way, I've got quite a number of those books that you've written behind me here. You helped fill up my bookshelf, Dianna.
Oh, thank you. You and my mom both.
And more people than that, many more than that. One thing that you and I talked about one time was your writing method. There are some people who think, oh, yes, I'll write a book. I'll just do that this weekend. And I think I shared with you a quip one time that I heard where somebody says at a party, Oh, yes, I'm writing a book. I've got all the pages numbered. but, but
People
you,
do tend to procrastinate, that's for sure.
yes, and you and I know it's not that simple. I want you to share, please, what you told me one time about your writing method, how intense it is, how totally captivating it is. And the example, and I'm sure you'll remember it, is one evening you were dressed for a dinner party and you said, "Oh, wait, I'm going to type a few lines here in this book I'm writing." What happened on that, Dianna?
Yes, that was a novel. Now, I don't always get that intense on nonfiction, and I can get that intense, but I was writing a novel and I was ready early. The party was at 7. And I was ready by 6:30, and I sat down and I thought, well, I'm just going to write this one conversation. I had this conversation in mind, and my characters do speak to each other, in my head. And so I sat down and I thought, I'll write this conversation. And I was sitting there typing. My husband was out of town, so he wasn't going with me, and I didn't have anybody to remind me. It was before cell phones. I couldn't set my alarm, which I frequently have to do to remind myself to stop and eat. And the next time I looked at my watch, it was 10 o'clock. And I had missed the entire party. I had to call up and apologize for not coming. I just get very, very focused. And that's how I do just get into a zone when I have an outline already prepared. And again, when I'm teaching this 12-step process for writing, for doing it in, just a few days, I say, do all your prep up front. You know where you're going, have it outlined, have it laid out so that when you actually sit down to draft it, you can just fly through, and it just tends to just roll off your fingertips.
Really, it seems to me from what I've read about your method, you can even write for 8 and 10-hour stretches. Is that correct?
That would be a short day, Bill. That would be
a short day.
That would be a short day. Yes, I do what I call writing marathons. So that when my feet hit the floor, 6 o'clock in the morning, I will go to the computer before I brush my teeth, before I eat breakfast, before I get dressed. I mean, just in my PJs, I will go to the computer and start writing. That's my first 2 or 3 hour stretch. And then I use all the things you have to do during the day, like brush your teeth, eat, exercise, as my breaks throughout the day. And I generally put in a 12 to 14 hour day till I get it done. And the shortest book I've ever done was a 2-day book. And again, granted, that was a gift book that I did, published it first for Thomas Nelson, and then Hallmark picked that book up. That was a gift book, a short book, took 2 days. I've done 2 books in that length of time. Another book that I did for McGraw-Hill was 4 days, but the typical book, it takes me about 14 days. Again, I'm not talking 8-hour days, I'm talking 12 or 14-hour days, but that's to me what it takes to get it done. Now, that doesn't mean editing. You go back later, that's a totally different thing, to go back and polish the sentences and move things around. But you need to get it down on paper so you can play with it. And that's easy. That's you feel like, hey, it's done. It's there. The information is there. And that's much easier. It's that getting that first draft down that most people hate, and they dread doing it because that's what they consider the hard work. And Bill, I do know that those are authentic times, because when I had my training company before I sold it a few years ago, I kept a log, a yellow log, and here's my start time, my stop time, how many pages, how many words. It was a great motivator to get you through it.
I think this reminds all of us that a book doesn't just happen. And what you say about getting the words on paper first and then editing them, it reminds me, one of my favorite books is James Michener's autobiography. Possibly you've read it, The World is My Home. In there, he talks about his writing method. And he said, sometimes people call me the greatest writer in the world. He said, I may not be the greatest writer in the world, but I could be the greatest rewriter in the world.
Yeah, most people do rewrite. In fact, all of the famous writers that I know of, that when I've read their writing on writing, when they're talking about their craft and their techniques, talk about their process of rewriting. In fact, Hemingway said, writing is rewriting. And that's just a given. You can't be creative in getting your work down, thinking of a great word play, a great acronym to use, a great metaphor when you're trying to polish the sentence and get rid of the grammatical error. So those are just totally different steps.
I remember Og Mandino. I read quite a few of his books. And I remember Og Mandino talking about the writing process. And he wrote by hand. He didn't write with typewriter, and most of his books were before computers. He wrote by hand, and sometimes he said he would write 8 drafts, complete drafts of a book. Can you imagine doing that by hand? That gets into the business of hard labor.
Yes, Grace Paley. I heard her speak once at a writers' conference. I was doing faculty, and I think it was at Maui Writers' Conference when I was on the faculty there. She won the Pulitzer Prize for short story writing, and she was also a professor and of creative writing. And she said, I do about 7 drafts, and then I take it to class for my students and tell them it's my first draft and let them critique it. So yes, that's just a given with excellent writers.
Let me ask you this. I know that one of your major professional contributions is helping aspiring writers get into print. And during the past few years, I've been well aware, as many are who follow your work, of the book boot camps that you hold. Describe those to us, please. Tell us what's involved, what you teach, and what's accomplished with those aspiring writers who come there.
Yes, in those book camps, what I try to do is to help people walk away with their query ready to go to an agent and their book proposal completed. And if people come with that attitude, I am really going to focus on this, they will do that in 3 days. And that is the biggest stumbling block, because many people think, well, I have an idea and I'll do it later, but I want them to do it right there. I don't want them to get into the procrastination. So if they come, I'll talk about their options for publishing. We'll talk about how to shape the idea. And, someone said, I think it was Sam Goldwyn Mayer, who said, if you can't tell us your movie plot in a sentence, you'll never sell your movie. And that's true of a book. If you can't summarize your what I call the selling handle of your book in a sentence, you'll never be able to sell it. So we try to help you focus the unique angle of your book. And that takes some work. And once you get that, people go, aha, that was the block. That's why I couldn't sell this book before and get an agent. So we get you focused and then help you get your 10 ingredients that need to go in that book proposal, and then write the query letter to the agent ready to go. I tell you how to find an agent and then how to pitch them. And so at the end of 3 days, and we'll also go through this 12-step process for writing quickly, give you some checklists for polishing your writing. And we'll even talk about licensing the content if you're trying to build a business around it, as many people, many CEOs and entrepreneurs have built an entire business around their book and launched it and built a product or a professional career or speaking business or many, many different kinds of business around it. So when they leave, if they have focused on it, we'll do this virtually. And so they have time in the evenings to do the assignments and work on it. They will walk out with the query letter ready to go to an agent and a book proposal ready to send in to that agent.
And so you've had very good success with people who come to that book camp or boot camp, whichever you call it.
Yes, and absolutely.
They get into print as a result, which brings me, Dianna, to something I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention, and that is there's so many would-be, want-to-be authors who say, well, gee, I'm just going to pay to have my book published. Nobody will know, nobody cares. What's your response to what we call vanity press?
Well, I do not recommend that. There's something to be said for self-publishing. It does not distinguish you in any way, because anybody can self-publish. We have the technology. You can be on Amazon tomorrow. Just print your book off on Microsoft Word, take it to a book printer, and they'll print it. But that doesn't give you the credibility by being published by a major publisher. They could publish anybody, and they've chosen your book. If you're looking for credibility and leads to come in and really being selected and having authority in building your brand. You want to be published by a major publisher. But the problem with hiring it out to a hybrid publisher is that it costs you 50% more than if you were self-publishing, because they're going to build in their profits. So in other words, they're selling to you. They're making their money off you, the author. You're having to pay them. It's a pay to publish situation. They will tell you they're going to market your book and get you in catalogs and stores and with wholesalers to put your book and distribute it. They don't. I mean, that's the bottom line. They cannot market you. They will list you in a catalog, but they're not selling your book anywhere. They're selling it to you with a huge markup. You pay a lot of money up front. They cannot distribute, and it does not distinguish you in any way. So the only thing that it does is you're not having to go out and find you a cover designer, an art designer, an internal designer, do the editing. They'll go find a graphic designer. They'll go find an editor to clean it up. But other than that, you're paying through the nose, so to speak, for those services and their production help. But I highly would not recommend that. I would just either self-publish if you cannot sell it to a major publisher, self-publish, or try to go to a major publisher. And most people are delighted to know, Bill, that the publisher, if you get a major contract, pays you up front.
Yes.
If you're writing a business book or self-help, pop psychology, based on that book proposal, they write you a check and pay you that advance right up front. And that's a great motivator.
Yes, it is.
That manuscript.
Have time for just one more question.
Sure.
You, of course, were an English major. I want to make a comment first and then a question. One of the comments is, when you talked about at your book camp, getting people to boil it down to one sentence, it reminds you, and I'm sure it reminds me, and I'm sure it reminds you of our English teachers way back when, who would say to us, you've got to get a theme sentence. You can't do anything until you get a theme sentence. That's my comment. Now, my question for a closing question is, certainly anyone who has written 49 books and someone who helps other people write books and someone who has been a major figure internationally in communication, as you are, certainly you have authors who have been your favorites, maybe even been models for you. Who would be the 2 or 3 authors that have helped shape your life and your career?
Well, there's several for different reasons. I love William Faulkner, and I happen to have studied my master's degree in writing under Beverly Lowry, who is called the female William Faulkner. What I like about him is his ability to write stream of consciousness. The thoughts, they are just so reflective of the way people really think. I love Hemingway because of his ability to capture real dialogue. If you want to study dialogue, read Hemingway. I love F. Scott Fitzgerald, The Great Gatsby, because of his ability to do observation as a narrator, to reflect culture and the way he describes that. I love Tolstoy's opening line of Anna Karenina. I just love that. Sometimes I just think about sentences like that one, the one he opened where he says, all happy families are alike. All unhappy families are different in their own way. And it's an unhappy family, I think is the way it goes. An unhappy family, it's different. Each unhappy family, it's different in its own way. And that's just, it's so true to life. I mean, to think about a thought like that. And that's the reason I like books so much. You can read a sentence and you can think about it and you can read it over and you can read it and you can think, that just captures life. And I'm going on and on. You can tell I'm passionate.
Oh, yes.
Great writers.
And I would be sure you're still a tireless reader, just as you are a writer. To have something to write about, you continually have to feed your brain, don't you?
You do. The more you read, the better writer you are. And I would say read in all different genres. Read a lot of different things. I have a friend, not a friend, a family member, who's writing now in science fiction and sent me this book to read. I have never read science fiction. That's the one genre I've never read, but I'm amazed. It's good, and I'm captured, and I'm fascinated by it. And the story arc is the same, even though I will never try to write anything in science fiction. You learn from everybody's ways of expressing themselves, and you can't read enough. It even when you're writing now, in the throes of drafting something, in that 7-day or the 14-day period when I'm writing, I'm not reading something else. That would be too confusing. But in other times when you're editing, you're marketing, you're building your business, that's plenty of time to read and learn and think about how they express themselves.
I remember Stephen King in his book on writing saying that he couldn't imagine anyone becoming a writer unless they are a very avid reader. It's just a part of it. Thank you for sharing those with us. Thank you for being with us so much. And I want to ask you, Dianna, I know people will want to contact you, so please give us your contact information.
Yes, that's BooherResearch.com. Like my last name, Booher, Booher. I always try to tell people it's like Booher, except I hope you don't. BooherResearch.com.
All right, thank you. And again, I encourage people to get in touch with Dianna. I definitely encourage you to read her books. She is not only prolific, she's profound, and yet she knows how to take great ideas and put them into common words, as Hemingway did, one of her idols. And now that Dianna has given her contact information, I'm glad to share mine. Since I'm the biz communication guy, it's logical that my website is bizcommunicationguy.com. I invite you to go there, check my services for corporations and leaders, and give me a phone call so that we can discuss your communication problems and challenges and how I can help you find solutions to them. Many thanks again to Dianna Booher for being our stimulating, provocative, and informative guest today. Thanks to those of you who joined us on video and on the podcast. Be with us again next week. I'm Bill Lampton, the Biz Communication Guy. Be with us again on the Biz Communication Show.